Well, I will tell you, I intended or I suspected that when I went into short-term rentals that my favorite thing was going to be the cash flow from it because they typically cash flow tremendously well. But that is not my favorite thing, actually. My favorite thing is
Welcome back to this week's episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. Now with summer upon us, what better to start thinking about than short-term rentals? And today we have the queen of short-term rentals joining us today. We have Stacey St. Stacey, thank you so much for being here today. How you doing?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. And I feel very special that I get called the queen of short-term rentals. So thank you for the compliment.
Of course. This is a space that I know that you've been in and that you are well known for that. And I am so happy that you're going to come on here and really just start to talk a little bit more about that space and what's going on in short-term rental world. So for those listeners that are not familiar with you yet, can you just give us like a short little introduction about who you behind the real estate? We'll get into the real estate in a minute, but who are you, Stacey, the woman?
Ooh, the woman. Let's see. Well, I am a wife of 30 years. My husband and I are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. I have two boys, age 25 and 21. My hobby is I sing competitively. So I am an a cappella singer, and that's a passion that I've had for my entire life and competed my entire adult life. I love all things Shark Tank, anything with Julia Roberts in it. I love movie wise, and I love coffee and red wine.
If you had to pick one of those two, and that would be it.
I have to say coffee. I have to say coffee. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you and I will not have to compete for drinks. I am a tea and white wine person. So weird, but yes, I don't know why, but yeah, I'm kind of on the other side. So only when I'm in Spain or the Dominican Republic, red wine.
Okay. Now I've not been to Spain, but I've heard their red wine is like impeccable and it's super cheap. So
Yes.
I need to get over there.
I actually did not drink red wine until I moved to Spain and then realized that red wine was cheaper than water.
Yes.
So I said, you know what? I guess I'm going to have to like red wine and just save myself some money. So
I mean, in my next life, I am going to be a Spaniard and I am going to live in Spain and just drink red wine all day.
they're also, those two countries, oddly enough, are also really well known for their coffee.
Really?
Spain and DR, yeah.
Who knew?
Yeah. So short-term rentals, this was not a very popular thing years ago, right? It was not as well branded, not as well put together. At what point did you start to venture into real estate?
Yeah. Well, I actually got into real estate by accident. So my oldest son was going to college in Orlando, Florida, and the particular university he was attending did not offer any campus housing. And we flew down there to look at apartments around the campus. As you might imagine, they knew they had a good target audience and their prices were ridiculous. So my husband said, well, why don't we buy a condo for our son to live in? And I thought that was a brilliant idea. So we purchased a property. And a couple weeks after we closed, our son came to us and was like, hey, I have decided I want to do their online program. So I'm not ready to move. And my husband and I said a few choice words. But then we figured, well, let's get a property manager and rent this condo out. And after a few months, we realized, hey, we're making money at this. Let's buy some more long-term rentals. And when COVID hit, by this time I was doing flips and had my real estate license. And COVID hit and all these eviction moratoriums started popping up. And my husband and I thought, gosh, we don't really feel comfortable buying another long-term rental right now. What if we bought a short-term rental? At least someone would have to pay in order to get in the front door. And so that's kind of when we pivoted from long-term rentals into short-term rentals. And once I started, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. I'm addicted. I love it. And game over.
And then here we are now.
Here we are now.
Where do you reside most of the time for our listeners that aren't familiar with you?
Yeah, so I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the majority of my portfolio is about 10 hours away in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And then I also have a portfolio of properties in Hocking Hills, Ohio. So that's about 2 hours away from me. And I co-host a few properties here locally as well.
Gotcha. The reason I was asking was because you had mentioned that property in Orlando. So that's why I wanted to make it clear to our listeners
Yeah,
that you are not anywhere near Florida. Where
nowhere near.
right. So this was actually something that first property that you bought was nowhere near even where you were living. Made sense if that's where your son was planning on
Yeah,
going.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm sure that was a fun conversation. But
yeah.
when you purchased that one and had the long-term rentals, you also got your real estate license at that point in time.
Mhm.
So were you working as an active realtor then also in Ohio?
Not really. I really just got my real estate license to help with our investing. So, what occurred after we got that condo rented out, we decided to start buying some other investment properties here in Ohio. And I found that real estate agents, unfortunately, did not have the timeliness of returning phone calls. And so when a great deal would hit the MLS, it would be gone before I could even get in and see it with my real estate agent. And
Mhm.
so I thought, gosh, if I had my real estate license, I could just schedule my own showing and go the moment something hit the market. Little did I know at the time that it's a heck of a lot of work to get your real estate license and hold your license. And so, if your listeners are wondering, do I need my real estate license in order to invest? No, absolutely not. You do not.
That is not the space that I want to be in at all.
Yeah.
But I absolutely do appreciate that idea, especially if you don't have a great realtor on your side,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And it is very, very hard to find the right one. Some of our listeners have heard my podcast. When I was looking for my first property, I spoke to like 50 different realtors. And they literally would not talk to me on the phone for more than a minute. They were like, nope, go get pre approved, go on Zillow, pick out a house, call me back when you want to see it. And I'm like, this can't be the normal way. It took forever to really find somebody that was responsive. So I love the fact that
Yeah.
you said, well, what's the solution to the problem? For
Yeah.
that'll be the realtor. But
Yep.
yes, there are then the fees associated, the being a part of a brokerage, all that stuff.
It's quite a hefty price tag. So I don't know that I would actually do it that way again.
Hmm.
But now that I have my license, I'm certainly keeping it. But I've never really acted as a traditional real estate agent that does consumer based transactions. I've utilized it to support my investing and, of course, be able to have connections with other agents and refer business to them. It's been a wonderful adventure, but certainly, again, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would you envision yourself having your real estate license or investment properties at the beach? I would be like, you're crazy. What are you talking about?
And I hear that so often from so many of our lady landlords that really they ended up in this industry kind of by accident and they just kind of went with it. So
Mhm.
now you have long-term rentals at this point in time. You also are a licensed realtor. You also said in there that you did flips. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the flips that you've done?
Oh my gosh. Let's see here. Well, I have done a snippet of multiple things in the real estate space, looking to understand what I enjoy best. So I did some wholesaling, I did some flipping. Neither wholesaling nor flipping were really my cup of tea. And one flip actually in particular was here locally in Cincinnati. And I think I mentioned to you that I sing competitively. And my dad, I grew up in a singing organization with my dad, my grandpa, my uncle. That's how I
Oh,
met my
wow.
husband. My husband sings. It's a whole family affair here. The house that I purchased to flip was someone that my grandparents knew. I knew, my parents knew from our singing organization. So it was just like, wow, small world. So to be able to bring his house kind of back to life and current was a really special project because I knew the owner originally. So anyway, it was definitely a fun thing. But I would say my flips have been mostly cosmetic type flips. I've done a lot of rehab work actually at the beach when I first started buying in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I loved buying ugly properties. And there were lots of options in Myrtle Beach, I will tell you. So I again focused on doing cosmetic updates, new paint, new floors, new fixtures, kitchens, bathrooms, but no structural changes. And that has served me incredibly well, even in the short-term rental space. I was able to double my money on my first two condos. I held them for a year, did a 1031 exchange, and upgraded into a condo that actually my husband and I are planning on retiring in. So it's been a really fun adventure, but some of those rehabs I've held on to for a little bit of time and then ended up selling just to, again, keep leveling my portfolio up.
Gotcha. Couple of questions within there that I want to break down. One, why Myrtle Beach?
Okay. So here was what we are looking for. We had $100,000 to spend. We wanted it to be in an area that was within driving distance of us here in Ohio, and we wanted to be on the ocean. We also wanted a condo specifically because think about being 10 hours away from your property and there's a hurricane coming. I didn't want to have to worry about the roof or, boarding up windows, things like that. So we looked at Fort Lauderdale. That is not very easily drivable from Ohio. So that was out. Our other two markets that we had done research on and really liked were Myrtle Beach and Destin, Florida. Well, in Destin, with my budget, I could overlook possibly a small pond.
Maybe a dumpster.
And in Myrtle Beach, I could be oceanfront for less than $100,000.
Right.
And so it was just a no-brainer and a process of elimination, shall we say, but we've never looked back. Again, absolutely love it there.
And it is a gorgeous, absolute gorgeous place. So I'm glad that that worked out. But thanks for walking us through kind of how you selected that. Thought about your criteria, you thought about your budget, you thought about what was important to you, and then really narrowed down your focus based on that. I think sometimes women get so overwhelmed with, well, there's so many miles of coast around the United States. So beaches, you know, is such there's so many different options there. So I love that you really thought about your criteria first.
Yeah. The fact that we had our own criteria that was important to us. I get frustrated, and I'm curious if you do the same, but I get frustrated when people tell other people where they need to invest. Because I'm like, how is it that you know what that person needs? I don't know. I feel like it's irresponsible in a way. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I completely agree with you. And trust me, as a person that invests mostly in New York, I hear it all the time, right? I get a lot of like, oh my God, New York is such like a horrible place. Why would you invest there with it? It's so not landlord friendly. You should totally invest in like Iowa. But I'm in New York. I like the returns I can get in New York. I'm buying larger assets in New York that work for me. I get a little bit more in rent than I would in Iowa over here in New York City, right? So I find that very interesting. And I feel like that's kind of that availability heuristic. People tend to, when they make a decision, feel that their decision's right. So they have to constantly be reminding themselves that they made the right decision. So I feel like that's kind of led to this place where it's like, well, I invest in Ohio, so clearly that's the right answer. Therefore, everybody else should. And as to people that do a lot of online things, I agree with you that I do find it really irresponsible. And I feel like I can see just like masses of people following when all of a sudden somebody's like, hey, I found the new hot spot. It is Charlotte.
Right.
And that's great that that works for that person, but that doesn't mean it works for everybody else.
Right.
And as women, I love to see us building the lives that we want with real estate, which means we need to think about factors that are important to us.
Yeah.
My short-term rentals in the Dominican Republic. I am much happier with that on my island, beachfront, same thing. That was incredibly important to me. That's my other home. Those were the things that were important to me rather than saying like, guess I'm going to go somewhere in Iowa this year, like that. I'm sorry, I'm picking on Iowa today. I don't know why, but it's just something that I think we need to start with what's important to us. What are our values? What do we want in a property? And then kind of put the puzzle pieces together with that. I'm glad you agree with that. So I love that you sat through and you thought about what was going to be important then for you and your family. The other thing you said in there that was important that we don't hear as often about, condos.
Yes. I was specifically looking for a condo again for the reasons that I mentioned. And a lot of people get scared away by condos. And I
Right.
understand because in a traditional setting in Iowa, as an example, you might purchase a condo and you might have 99% of that condo community living there full time. In Myrtle Beach, actually, most of the ocean front are made up of what are referred to as condotels. So
Hmm.
they're condos that are also have a front desk, almost like a hotel front desk. And so the majority of the owners in those condo buildings are investors, just like you and I. And so it's a very different dynamic where I don't have to worry about the condo not allowing short-term rentals because it's the thing to do there, if that makes sense.
Right. Like, I feel like that's been the selling point. And some of the short-term rentals that I looked at in certain spaces, they make it very clear, usually when you're looking at those projects, saying like, well, by the way, look how great this would be for Airbnb. What a great short-term rental this would be. Those are things that they understand this is what people are looking to do.
Yeah.
Right. And with the way that we've moved into such a remote world, working from home, people are able to say, hey, you know what? I can stay there for a few weeks. I can make a couple bucks when I'm not there.
Mhm.
So now picked up these places, you moved into that short-term rental space, you thought about your criteria when you went out and bought it. What is your favorite thing about short-term rentals over long-term rentals?
Well, I will tell you, I intended or I suspected that when I went into short-term rentals that my favorite thing was going to be the cash flow from it because they typically cash flow tremendously well. But that is not my favorite thing, actually. My favorite thing is the fact that I get to be a part of some family's vacation in some small
Huh.
way. And that was totally surprising to me, but I am not joking. When I am at the beach and I open up the sliding glass door and I hear the waves, I love hearing the waves, but equally as important, I love to hear the laughter of families enjoying time together. And I never would have dreamed that I would have such an emotional tie to something that I originally went into as a real estate investor first. So it's been really cool.
That is really cool. And exactly what you're saying. You kind of went in thinking, okay, this is a way to make money and
Yeah.
better money than the long-term rentals. But then you kind of found this other satisfaction
Mhm.
within that space.
Yeah.
What what was the biggest challenge that you faced moving into short-term rentals that you so did not expect?
You know, different than long-term rentals, short-term rentals is a very active business. There are two different sides to this. There's the real estate side, but then there's the operations side. Different than a long-term rental, your operations are going to be much more complex sometimes and have a lot of moving parts, right?
Hmm.
And so I didn't anticipate some of the subtleties of, okay, Airbnb, they very candidly, I have a huge amount of gratitude for Airbnb. They're a driver of revenue in my business, but sometimes they're not very friendly to hosts. I still have challenges with that. And I still am talking with my Airbnb market manager to understand, hey, I realize that the guests are important and they are important to prioritize. However, there are a lot of situations, unfortunately, where guests do dishonest things or they will unfortunately do things that are to the detriment of the host. And a lot of times, in my experience and what I've seen, hosts don't always have the opportunity to respond or fix those things without being penalized by Airbnb. And so I think it's really important that as hosts and our host community that we start talking about the fact that the hosts need to have a voice as much as the guests have a voice so that we can be more equal parties to the Airbnb platform. And again, I adore Airbnb. I have no issue with Airbnb, but I think there's an opportunity for hosts to have a broader voice among that community.
I find even
Mhm.
in the long-term rental market, a lot of legislation. When you look at those types of policies that come through, just like Airbnb would do just as much as a municipality, you tend to hear you have all the tenants slash guests on one side, and there's just thousands, millions, versus when you see the other side that are the hosts, the owners, the landlords, right? And there tends to be less of us, right? And then there's very different perceptions about kind of the other crowd on that side. So I do see why Airbnb looking at the masses as kind of that lifeblood, but without the place to stay in, there's no guests. One criticism that I personally have heard a little bit about pushback with short-term rentals over the past couple of years is sites like Airbnb and others that have changed their restrictions and changed their policies kind of a little bit more in favor of those guests versus the owners. And what's become the conversation from that is that these hosting sites, these booking sites, really then can control a lot of the business for a short-term rental. Do you agree with that? Disagree?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think, again, Airbnb is an amazing platform and can be a phenomenal way to drive bookings to your property. I would always, though, encourage a host to not have Airbnb or Vrbo as the end all be all. Make sure you have a business plan in place that supports a funnel that takes those on platform bookings and converts them to a direct booking the next time. So again, you're getting new guests in at the top of the funnel, but then you have a plan to bring them down and have them book direct with you the following stay. So it's important to have a comprehensive marketing plan in place for sure. And again, I hope that I don't come across that I don't appreciate or value Airbnb or Vrbo or any other platform. You have to have a plan in order to make sure that you are protecting your revenue stream, and that revenue stream can absolutely include direct bookings.
Right. And I love that idea of doing that. That actually, as a person that also frequents Airbnbs, I like when then I could start to direct book. I usually get a better rate. I have better communication. The host that I'm staying with has a little bit more of an idea of what I like, what I'm looking for, those types of things, and what type of guest I'm going to be, which just kind of makes the whole situation much easier from that perspective. So now you're competing. You have these, we'll just call them the platforms, right? So that way we don't hit too much SEO here, but it's the name of the company. You started moving into that space in 2020 during the pandemic. There were some other people that noticed that there were a lot more staycations during the pandemic. People were not flying as much. Interest rates were really low. A lot of people decided to enter that Airbnb space during that time. What trends have you seen really over the past 4 years? Right now, all of a sudden, kind of getting flooded in 2020 with a lot more people entering the space to now.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things come to mind right from the get-go. As you mentioned, there were a lot of people that entered the short-term rental space. And quite candidly, in 2020, you could buy a short-term rental, throw it up on a platform, and you would make money hand over fist. Like you didn't really have to try. Okay. Now there's so much inventory that's new. What we're seeing is you've got high inventory. You've got people's pocketbooks being constrained, okay, with the economy. And so they're making different choices and maybe choosing to travel less or go someplace closer to home. So you've got a different travel demand, and you're still seeing an influx of new inventory. You've got already high inventory that continues to grow, a lower demand. So we're seeing average daily rates go down. And so I think it's really important to know that if you're getting into the short-term rental game, it's incredibly important to, number one, run your numbers and make sure you analyze that deal appropriately so that you feel solid and you're making a strategic, data-driven decision about that purchase versus, oh my gosh, it's the cutest house ever, and it's going to be so perfect as an Airbnb, right? So making sure you're being smart and strategic about your decisions.
I remember talking to this couple that was looking at one of the other units in my complex along a whole strip of complexes on an island with a whole bunch of complexes. And this woman was just like, this is like the perfect place. I mean, look, it has starfish and seashells. It's just so perfect. I think maybe some other people have thought of beachy decor for for the beach. I like where you're thinking, but that's probably not going to stand out when
Yeah.
people search beachfront properties because you have blue linen, right? So that's why I was laughing. So but it really
Yeah.
kind of goes to that idea of how do you stand out a little bit more and really the marketing component rather than, like you said, in 2020, just throw it up and
Yeah.
people were booking it.
The other thing too is in addition to running your numbers and making strategic decisions, you also there's an element of hospitality, right? We're not just running a business. We're not just having a profitable real estate investment. We are serving people, right? And making sure that we have systems and processes in place to be the best hosts possible, right? And for me, I've built a whole team around me that helps me in the day to day, which is amazing to have that as a resource. And there are lots of people that don't have a team. That's okay. But I think if you're just starting out or you're thinking about moving into the short term rental space, you can opt to purchase a short-term rental and you don't actually have to operate it yourself. You
Right.
can outsource to a property manager or to a co-host. Conversely, you can actually host a short-term rental without owning the real estate. You can co-host, you can do rental arbitrage. So there are lots of options for people that are in the short-term rental scene or want to be there. But I think what's really important is knowing that you can't just get by these days and make money. You really have to come into this business knowing that you're going to need to get educated if you want to do well. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to need to have some unique selling proposition about your property, whether it's the design, whether it's the location, amenities that you offer. Um, and again, the more you can stack on top of each other, the better for you. But I think gone are the days where people can just sit back and open their wallet and let that money pour in from short-term rentals. It's more work these days.
Right. And I feel like not just from an economic standpoint of the guest, but also the competition level. And also because I like the tips that you just threw out there about what we can kind of do to stand out and be a little bit different. Once again, 8 other people that also did beach themed
That's right.
condos
That's
over
right.
the ocean.
And it's funny in my own market, I can look at new properties that pop up. I'm like, oh, I know where they bought that picture. Oh, I know where
Yeah.
they bought that throw pillow.
And once again, when you start thinking islands or certain areas in the Dominican Republic, where one of my rentals is in Punta Cana, we don't necessarily have a lot of stores there. It's very expensive to get things imported from the States, from Canada. A lot of people in Punta Cana are Canadian. So it's like, okay, we're all going down to the one IKEA, and then there's one lighting store, and here are the 4 lamps they have. I guess we're going to do that.
Yeah.
Right? You'll start to see amenities, a lot of the same, not only amenities, but a lot of the same furnishings because
Sure.
that's all you can do. Myrtle Beach, a little more options, but
A little more options. Yes. I'm curious. Can you ship things? Like, can you order things from West Elm or Wayfair or Pottery Barn and have them shipped there easily?
mm, easily is probably the operative word there. You absolutely can. You can order from Amazon and get that delivered to the Dominican Republic, but you have to think they ship differently. There's no like Prime to go down there. You now
Gotcha.
are looking at longer times to get there. They ship by weight. So usually what I'll do if I do an Amazon order, I'll put everything in there and then I'm like, great, I also need this toiletry, this toiletry, this toiletry, just to
Mm,
kind of fill up the bucket. And then once
right.
I see that I go to the next price point for weight, then I'm like, no, 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 take that pack of tissues out.
The
That's
lip gloss is out.
there's also other options that you can do is you can actually ship shipping containers. This is something my husband and I do on a regular basis. You can get a shipping container that's like the size of us, like a huge shipping container. It goes down through the port of Miami and then goes to the Dominican Republic. But you have to remember customs. You have to remember Caribbean time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're trying to capitalize on those 3, 4 months in high season in the Dominican Republic, and all of a sudden you got a barrel shipped and you're looking at 2 to 3 months, that might kind of cause some problems, right? Also, just as Myrtle Beach with hurricanes,
Mm-hmm.
certain places, especially Caribbean islands, don't always have the infrastructure to bounce back as quickly. That's still problems in Puerto Rico from years ago with Hurricane Maria.
Sure.
So those are things that you have to remember. Now, how does that change infrastructure, workers, people to actually unload shipping containers? It really does kind of change that way. So easier, absolutely, to go local, but then once again, you're look the same as everybody else next to you. With one of the things that I love also in there that you said is really kind of a big difference that I'm hearing between the short-term rental market and the long-term rental market is actually kind of entering that hospitality space,
Mhm.
right? It's more than
Mhm.
just here are your four walls, here's the key. You are now curating their experience and their time. We already have these conversations in Lady Landlords about that call to the broken toilet in the middle of the night, come over and change a light bulb, all that stuff. Talk to me. I know you mentioned team there, but one of the biggest questions that we always get is, but I don't live there. How am I going to find cleaners? How do we find
Mhm.
good cleaners? Right?
Mhm.
That's kind of a crux to being able to have that turnover. What tips do you have there?
Oh gosh. Well, I am all about leveraging social media to find great team members. And I can't always say that it is a magic slam dunk from the get go, but I have recruited, I'm going to say a good 80 to 85% of my team members from local Facebook groups. So joining Facebook groups in the local community, getting connected with other people who live there. I think it's also really important to proactively share what it is you're looking for and not just ask for people to reach out to you, like if you're interested, but who do you know? Who do you recommend that is a great handyman? Because I have discovered that if I'm able to see the same person or company recommended by multiple people or in multiple groups, that has a better weight in a good way for that particular service provider. So I love going to local Facebook groups to find vendors.
Then, from a need perspective, with now your guests, do you feel that you've seen an uptick in the short-term rental communications with guests compared to when you had the tenants and long-term rentals?
Definitely. I think that guests, again, they are coming in and staying in our properties and they are wanting to experience all kinds of things. So they're not just asking about, hey, how can you help me understand how I turn on the dishwasher? They're asking, where can I go for a great pizza spot? Or what is the best place to go to get family photos taken? So it's a much more interactive engagement throughout their stay, not because there's anything wrong, but in fact, because it's like we're acting as a concierge in
Mm-hmm.
addition to being the provider of the property itself. So very different types of interaction, but it's again something that I think is tremendously amazing to again be a part of that experience for that guest. And candidly, I feel very blessed in a strange way to be able to do that.
Right. Also
Mhm.
talking, as you did before, about kind of that marketing funnel of moving them from a platform to direct bookings. Well,
Mhm.
hey, Stacey recommended this. She made that vacation what it was. Not only do I want to go to Myrtle Beach again, but now I'm going to stay in Stacey's unit. I'm not
Yes.
just going to go to Airbnb and just pick anyone I can because I want to go back to Myrtle Beach. I want to go back to Stacey's. I want to go back for that customer service, for that care. Well, maybe it's a couple extra bucks. Then
Right.
it could be at another unit that I don't know, but that service I'm
Yeah.
willing to pay the extra couple bucks for. And that's where you
Yeah.
get those guests really for year after year after year.
Absolutely. And I also, because I am in two different markets that are two different vacation markets and different types of vacation markets, I try to cross pollinate, market to my guests at the beach. Hey, do you want a different kind of stay? Come visit us in Hocking Hills, where you're out hiking and doing caves and canoe rides, things like that. And same thing. People in Hocking Hills, hey, want a different kind of stay? Come visit us at the beach. So it also is neat to be able to help provide different types of experiences for our guests as well.
What is the weirdest, most random, oddest request that you've gotten that you're like, I don't know how to answer that. It could be maybe if it was even before a guest, right?
Let's
Maybe
see
somebody
here.
reached out, right? You always get the people that ask for the discounts or, hey, can you change
I
this?
mean,
But what's the most like random thing that you were like, what are they
I
asking?
I I have had two requests like this, and to my core, like they bother me. I offer a military discount and a discount for first responders. I am a huge person of gratitude for the people who serve our country and serve our communities. And I've had two requests. One actually just occurred a few weeks ago. And it's someone reaching out saying, I have a special needs child. Could I get a discount? And this sounds very strange to say. Do I have anything but heart and best of luck if you have a special needs child? But I again want to offer discounts to the people who serve our communities. And it's just kind of hit me and struck a chord. Like I felt like those people were exploiting their special needs child.
And that's
It sounds,
also that's pulling at someone's heartstrings, really,
yeah,
even at that, because what I'm also hearing you saying is not only did you feel like they were kind of using their child and
yeah,
their that disability in kind of inappropriate way, but that also is putting you in a very difficult position to
yeah.
say no, unfortunately, that's not something I can support. It's
And it's
like,
not that I
what do you
don't want to
mean?
support them.
Of
Like
course.
it puts it in a very strange light. And I don't ever want to come off like I have anything but respect for parents who have special needs children. It's just in both scenarios, I felt kind of icky. Ooh. I will tell you one of the strangest situations that I had of late. So in Myrtle Beach, several of the properties are over the resort pool.
Hmm.
And I got a reach out from the resort HOA saying, hey, just so you know, we're sending the police up to one of your units. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? What's going on? Well, your guest is standing out on the balcony in the nude in the bus. And I'm like, excuse me? But yeah, he was actually removed by the police
Oh
because
my
he was
God.
evidently flashing the people at the pool.
Yeah, that's once again in this industry. Those are the things we're going to come across, and that could unfortunately also happen with a long-term tenant. So, last topic to kind of shift gears a little bit that I want to make sure to address with you. Boom of Airbnbs over the past couple years has then had certain cities, towns starting to restrict
Mhm.
what a short-term rental could really be, either putting in, hey, you have to now pay for an annual license, you have to have an inspection, banning them altogether, as we do here in certain areas in New York City. What is your take on these cities or towns starting to put those restrictions in that? And is that something that you, with a short-term rental portfolio, have concerns about in the future?
Yeah. I think it is a huge problem for a lot of people. I will say personally, I have chosen strategically to invest in tried and true traditional vacation rental markets. So for my own portfolio, I don't have those same concerns. Now, Myrtle Beach, as an example, you might imagine, gosh, they're very short term rental friendly because it's a huge tourist destination. Well, to the contrary, Myrtle Beach on the ocean front is extremely short term rental friendly. Myrtle Beach, a block away from the ocean, is not. Right. And so I understand with housing shortages and with, different things that communities are experiencing, the need for trying to regulate that a bit. I also think it's important for communities to have, if they feel the need to have some sort of licensing available, because of the fact that there are quite candidly so many people who aren't good hosts. If you saw some of the YouTube videos I've seen, like people checking into properties that aren't even their own or trying to get into properties that have no air
Wow.
conditioning or no bathrooms. I mean, people do very strange things. Okay. So again, I understand the need. In both of the markets I'm in, we have to have business licenses. We have to pay hospitality taxes each and every month. And so personally, I think some level of regulation is understandable. What I hate to see is communities banning short-term rentals altogether, because tourism is a very relevant part of many communities. People travel for other things besides vacation. They travel to go to weddings, to go to funerals, to go to birthday parties, class reunions, family reunions. They travel for corporate. And so I think those all together bans are something that I would certainly love to see shift. But I know a lot of folks are struggling with that these days.
I feel like that goes back to what we were even saying with Airbnb about how there needs to continue to be a dialogue between guests, hosts, locals. Everybody kind of really needs to work together and voice their concerns, and also say, what can we do that can really make sure to mitigate a lot of what we're seeing, but still allow people to have autonomy and run businesses and support community and still be happy in their homes and their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And I hope that we continue to have that dialogue as we move forward and allow people to live peacefully and live together. So.
Amen, sister. I would love to see people coming together, locking arms, even people with differing opinions come together and say, how can we work together instead of I'm right, you're wrong? I really long for those days where people could see differences and understand that someone might have a differing opinion and work together to find win-win solutions that benefit everyone. That would be my wish.
And I hope we do that in other spaces besides just the short-term rental market. I hope we can do that in a lot of different areas, but that's for a whole different conversation and different podcast. Stacey, thank you so much. This was a wealth of knowledge. Thank you very much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course. For all of our listeners, I will make sure to put Stacey's contact information down in the show notes. Please reach out. Please join some of the amazing things and events that she is doing. Also, please make sure to hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next episode of the Lady Landlords podcast. And if you enjoyed today's show, which I know you did, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. This helps other women find our podcast and get the support that they're looking for on their rental journeys as well.
Thank you for listening to the Lady Landlords podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate investing journey, visit lady-landlord.com to book a 15-minute orientation call with me and see if you're ready to join our mentorship program. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and join our Facebook group for exclusive real estate investing tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a Lady Landlord today.